Hello and welcome to another Plain Truth, and this week we're going to be talking about squawks. Joining me as always is the legend that is Captain Al. Hi Captain Al.
Hello and a very good evening.
A very good evening to you too. Now, this is a slightly odd one because I don't know a great deal about aviation, as people know, but I am familiar with the word squawk, and I seem to recall from various things that I've been reading online, etc. There's this 7700, and really I wanted to know what on earth they're all about. And I mean, I presume there's a list of these codes, for example. I mean, what are the codes for, and why are they used as opposed to just saying Mayday or something like that?
Okay, so let's have a look at what squawks are. So they are codes that are put into a transponder. So what is a transponder? Well, it's an electronic box that allows the aircraft to identify itself to a radar ground station. So if we go back a little bit to the invention of radar, and most people who aren't aviation related will have a mental picture of what's best described as an upturned dustbin lid with a little sweepy line that goes round and round and little blips, which is pretty accurate, really, or certainly was up until a few years ago. So that sort of old style radar with just little blips is great. But how do we know which blip is which? So prior to the invention of transponders, what the radar controller would do would be to get an aircraft to turn, say, left 40 degrees, and they would see which blip moved to the left by 40 degrees, and that would allow them to identify that blip, and they would make a mental note then as to which blip was which aircraft. As you can start to see, controllers of that era had to have a pretty good short-term memory because they were memorizing which blip as it moved across the screen.
Wow.
Not easy to do.
No, I bet.
And obviously quite a few blips on your screen. So as more and more aircraft were flying around, the fallibilities of this system were becoming to be quite well known. So the military had for a little while something called IFF. Not something I know an awful lot about, but IFF stands for interrogate, friend or foe. So if you imagine a box in your aeroplane and all of the people on your side have a similar box, and when the two boxes chat to each other, it goes, "I'm friendly, don't shoot me," then you can identify your team from the other team. Because if the other team don't have a box that sends back the same message, then you can assume them to be a foe. That's a very, very simple way of looking at it. But yeah, interrogate friend or foe. So let's go back to the civilian world. So civilian aircraft have a little box of electronics called a transponder. And what happens is that on the front of that box are some buttons or dials, and you can select a number between 0 and 7. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. And you can do that for 4 independent digits. So you could have 0, 0, 0, 0, or anything up to 7, 7, 7, 7. Okay. So it gives you quite a few combinations. Off the top of my head, and I'm not a mathematician, I think that's 4,096, but please don't quote me on that. That's just a number that it may well come from a Chinese takeaway that I'm familiar with, that number. But if there are any mathematicians, they might be able to prove or disprove my 4,096. Anyway, it gives you a number of combinations. So what happens is that when the aircraft is interrogated by the ground radar now, apart from sending its return back by virtue of being metal, it sends back the code that is on the transponder. So if air traffic control over the voice radio say Monarch 123, Squawk 1230, the pilots would select on their transponder box 1230, and that code will then be sent back to the ground station. The boxes on the ground will then associate that code with that blip, and therefore the controller is no longer looking at just a blip. He has a blip and the code that has been sent by the aircraft, in this particular case 1230. So now he's got to look at the blip, see the code, and remember which code he gave to which aircraft. Now, he's probably going to write that down because most will. As technology progressed a little bit further, the computer on the ground was able to convert that number into the aircraft call sign. So now you have a blip and the aircraft call sign. A lot easier for the controller, obviously. So where the origins of Squawk come from, truthfully, I don't know. I can only assume that it's the equivalent of just shouting out your identification. So we've gone from sort of basic radar to radar with what was called mode alpha transponders, which is the ability to send that 4-digit code that is allocated to you. And each air traffic control unit may well change that code. So you might start off with, 4545, and then the next controller might give you 6123 or something like that, and you will just change them. After a little bit of while, technology came along and allowed the aircraft to not only send its code, but to also send its altitude. So as you can imagine, previously the controllers had to have a pretty good 3D model in their head because you're looking at a 2-dimensional display for a 3-dimensional world. So now their situational awareness is enhanced because when the aircraft sends its altitude, the little box on the ground will interpret that, and then on the radar display will be the blip, the 4-digit code, which is now being converted into the call sign, and the aircraft's altitude. So that builds the picture up. We'll go forwards a few more steps, and then the transponder technology advanced a bit more, so that the altitude reporting was mode C, mode Charlie, and then we went on to mode Sierra, and now the transponder is able to send a lot more data. So, for example, it can send the call sign, it can send the speed that we're flying at, the speed that we've asked the aeroplane to fly at, our heading, and a whole host of other pieces of information. So in that little bit of sort of data stream, if you like, we can chuck a whole load of information in there. So basically, squawking is just the process of using the transponder on the aircraft to put in information that has been requested from ATC. Now, as you mentioned, there are some special codes. So these are internationally recognized or regionally recognized codes. So we'll start off with probably the most famous one, which is 7700, which is Mayday. So you said, why not just say it on the radio? Well, that's a fair point, but it assumes that your communication radios are working. Fair. And it also may be a case that you might have someone with a knife to your throat who may take offense at you transmitting what is going on. So maybe covertly you could put that code into the box, which takes us on to another code, which is 7500, which is hijack.
Oh, right.
So that could be put into the box, and air traffic controllers would therefore see that, and they will, by definition, not ask you details about what's going on because they will realize the situation. There is a code in between those, for those of you who are keeping up with this, which is 7600, which is that my radios have failed. So like I say, it's a secondary form of communication. It's not speech communication, it's data. So 7600, the radios have failed. So those three are internationally recognized. There are one or two more. So 2000 is basically, I'm coming into your airspace and the previous controller has not allocated me a specific squawk. So it's just an identification saying we are approaching you. We have not been assigned a code. In the United States. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry. Presumably somebody would then contact them and give them a code if radio was working okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So examples of where 2000 is used is where aircraft are coming across, say, for example, the Atlantic, where there is no radar coverage. So as they leave radar coverage in the United States or Canada, they will stop using their previous code, their squawk, and put 2000 up. And as they're then approaching the western part of Ireland, the Irish air traffic controllers will see the aircraft. They'll be able to see them on radar with their 2000 squawk, and therefore will then allocate them a code.
Okay.
There are a couple more. So in the UK, we use 7000 as just a general squawk for VFR. So that air traffic controllers can see you and can see that you are basically flying outside of controlled airspace in a VFR capacity, visual flight rules. The Americans use 1200 for the same purpose. And dotted around the UK and the world will be sort of like localized squawks. So say, for example, if you're flying around XYZ city, but not actually speaking to us, just put this code up and listen to us. We're not in a contract of controller and pilot, but we know that you're listening to us. So if we need to speak to you, we can see that where you are and we'll give you a call. Those are things they're called monitoring squawks. So yeah, it's just a box that adds on some facilities to us to identify ourselves with radar controllers.
So you're only sort of required to know like the emergency ones, essentially, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. And the rest is essentially the code is essentially given you. They're just trying to sort of summarise, really. So the code,
yeah. So
you're decided. You're told how to identify yourself on the system, essentially.
Yeah. So when you and I took off for our little flight in the little aeroplane, we had the squawk of 7000. It's just a general one that's used in the UK, saying I'm flying around, and of course the radar controllers can see that, and they know that we're not actually talking to a particular air traffic controller. So It just gives visibility without actually specifically being under control of any particular radar controller.
I mean, as always, very expertly explained. Thanks, Captain Al.
It's a pleasure.
If you'd like to watch more from our great series, then you can do that by pressing here. We've also created you a playlist with all the Plain Truth episodes, and you'll find that just here. Why not like and subscribe to our channel? That way you will be notified whenever we post our great content. Or if you've got a question that you'd like Captain Al to answer, then why not pop it in the comments box below, and you may well feature on an upcoming episode of The Plain Truth.